Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist. My name is Joel Goldberg, and I've got a great show for you today. As always, this is running audio-wise the Thursday after Memorial Day, so I hope everybody had a nice holiday weekend. It's great to see all of us continue to reemerge and try to get back to some form of normalcy. We'll get into some of that discussion today. My guest is a master coach, a podcast host, a national speaker, and a sober entrepreneur. That's interesting, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Her company is Kansas City Recovery Services. She's actually involved in, I think, a million things. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but not by a whole lot. Kansas City Recovery offers a safe, clean environment to stay sober and live happily. Angela Pugh is her name. She's an amazing story, and she has gone through this as well and now has made it her life to help others. She has a podcast called Addiction Unlimited. She teaches coaching methods to people who are striving to get and stay sober. She travels all over the place. She is based out of Kansas City, sort of, although she probably spends more time in LA and all over the place instead of Kansas City. Just lucky enough that through some connections, I was able to meet her. And there's a lot to discuss here in terms of leadership, in terms of purpose. And so I'm so excited right now to bring in my guest on the podcast, Angela Pugh. Angela, how are you?
I am fantastic, Joel. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's great to have you on. And when I have a guest that is involved in so many things, it means that we have so many things to talk about. So I don't really know where to start other than, and I want to get to your story in a moment, because I don't think that in general, someone suddenly just starts doing what you're doing without having had some type of experience that affected you as well. So we'll get to that. But how would you overall, beyond my somewhat general introduction, describe what you do?
Well, I would say the majority of my life revolves around recovery. That is super important to me. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and it really was the thing that changed my whole life, and kind of crazy. A lot of people have, obviously there's a stigma with addiction, alcoholism, and a lot of people have guilt and shame around that. And I was kind of the opposite from the beginning. For me, being an alcoholic was the best thing that ever happened to me. I knew very early in my personal sobriety, I knew very early that all I wanted to do was help other people do the same thing, get sober, get their life together, because getting sober really doesn't have so much to do with the not drinking part. It's like you have to change your life. You have to change who you've become in your active alcoholism and recreate yourself. And it affects every piece of you. And when I saw myself growing and changing as a human being, I just got super excited about it and shocked, by the way. I was kind of amazed that I was becoming a good person, because I wasn't ever sure I was capable of that. And I just knew that's what I wanted to help other people do. So in the very beginning, I think I was 2 years sober. So it was 13 years ago. I got certified to be a life coach. And that was something that had always interested me. I followed Tony Robbins, is probably the most famous life coach. And I had followed him from the time I was a young teenager. So I was always interested in that. And I just took those coaching skills and morphed it into all of these other things, right? So of course I'm a coach. I love coaching. Then I started doing interventions, just like the TV show. And all of my coaching skills are my most valuable tools in intervention too. So I really have spent most of the last 15 years traveling all over, doing interventions and speaking and coaching and working with families and people with addiction and people with everything else.
So it's a lot. And in your case, it's not just, hey, I'm setting up here and come and make an appointment. You are all over the place. And I want to hear about this. I know you told it to me offline, just to give people an idea of, I don't know if chaotic is the right way to describe your life, because I suspect that it's very organized. So that wouldn't be chaos. But the fact that you're all over the place certainly is different than maybe what others do. Like, where do you spend your time?
Well, I mean, obviously, coronavirus changed that a
Yeah.
lot. So, like everyone else, the last year or so, I have been homebound. Um, and, my second home is Los Angeles. I lived in LA for many, many years, and I still have a whole full life out there until coronavirus. I have not been, I kind of had to choose where I was going to quarantine. It made more sense to be in Kansas City, where my family is. I love Kansas City. I think it is America's best kept secret, honestly, and so many great things here. So I have been homebound for about a year and a half, have just started doing some traveling again, but I just shifted the majority of my services to be online, which I had started doing anyway a couple of years before coronavirus. I was already making that transition because I knew that I knew I wanted to be traveling more, and I still wanted to be able to serve my clients from wherever I was. So it didn't make sense to have an office anymore and kind of be tied to that.
I think that's interesting too, because for a woman that made her living bouncing all over the place and going to where you needed to go, and we could talk more about those interventions in a moment, because I think there's so much of this that involves when you talk about coaching, and it doesn't matter whether it is helping people get or stay sober, or whether it's coaching someone on a baseball field, a football field, in business. There's a lot of leadership involved. There's a lot about communication and listening. There's so many elements that I want to pick your brain on. But how did you make that adjustment as someone like all of us that was so accustomed to being face to face and knowing what that was like? And I heard so many complaints over the last year and a half about being out of touch, being at a distance. I've met so many people like you, and not like you in what you do, but just like this, via a
Mhm.
podcast or via a Zoom call. It's the world that we live in right now. The press conferences I now report on for baseball are via Zoom. I haven't seen those guys face to face. How did you make that adjustment, especially in a world that you're living in, where oftentimes that face to face could be a matter of, I don't know about life and death or not, but maybe sometimes there's a lot on the line.
Yeah, it is. But I think because I had traveled so much doing interventions, I had always been all over the place and working with families. So, really, when you leave somebody's actual city, you're all on the phone at that point anyway, right? So, all the ongoing care I would do with families was always phone calls. And now, of course, we've transitioned to Zoom, which has made it more personal and more enjoyable in a lot of ways. The connection, of course, is better. But I think for me, it's just always kind of been that way. And I had my core clients in Kansas City that I had met with for a long time in person, and they were happy to transition to phone calls and things like that. And then I had my core group of clients in LA because, again, I've always been back and forth. So it was easy for me to see people in person when I would be out there. But really, coronavirus made that transition for me because it was no longer optional.
Well, it's, we have to find ways, and you're right. If it's not
Mhm.
optional, there are one of two routes you can take. You either do nothing or wait, or you figure it out and you move forward. And of course, in the work that you're doing, and I know without knowing you too well, you have an incredible passion for helping others. There's no stopping this. It's not like it all goes away. If anything, more people, I think, and certainly the numbers suggest this in terms of mental health, and a lot of people have been affected in ways that they never expected to be before. And I think drinking probably is up, and all of the drug use, and a lot of stress, and a lot of adjustment. How have you seen that play out over the last year plus?
Well, certainly, two of the big things that go hand in hand with addiction are anxiety and depression. And all of those numbers have skyrocketed in the last year and a half with coronavirus. There's been a lot of isolation. I am blessed that I'm a bit of an extrovert, but I'm really more of an introvert. So listen, being locked in my house was really not a big struggle for me. I was pretty okay with that. Um, But for people that really do crave that in-person connection and being out and being around people, it has been incredibly challenging. And liquor sales skyrocketed. A lot of people that were sober relapsed, right? Because of the isolation, all the support groups were shut down. We didn't have our meetings to go to. Of course, a lot of people stepped up immediately. I know for me, with my online community, I started doing online meetings every single day of the week in the beginning, just to give people somewhere to connect and be safe. But it is very different than being at an in-person meeting and sitting with your friends and being in that energy. Suicide rates have skyrocketed also. And all of that is just the anxiety of the unknown. There's been so much fear, certainly in the beginning of coronavirus, when we just didn't know anything. And the death numbers were so astounding. I mean, that will scare the crap out of anybody. And then also people losing their jobs. So you put financial fear, and financial fear brings fear of, am I going to lose my home? And how am I going to pay for my things? And it is a lot of stress.
So let's go back a little bit to your story before I move on and talk about some of your business. And you mentioned this earlier in the podcast, and it's on your website too, angelapugh.com. Being an alcoholic, you write and have said, being an alcoholic is the best thing that ever happened to me. It allowed me to grow up into a person I never knew possible. And obviously it's given you incredible purpose in taking your experiences and expertise and making an impact in so many other people's lives. I'm guessing that that's such a major purpose for you in life. But tell me about your experiences and what you had to go through to get to here.
Well, it is a long, long journey. And that's the truth for most people. Getting sober is not an easy thing. Getting to a place that you understand you have to get sober is not an easy thing. It's really hard, especially, I say this with my clients all the time too. Conceptually, it's very, very difficult to come to an understanding that you really don't have any control over this. It's like it's a liquid in a glass. Like, how do I not have control over a liquid in a glass? It's very difficult to get to that place that you understand. Once you start drinking, you kind of lose control. I don't know how much I'm going to drink, what my behavior is going to be, what kind of chaos and disaster I'm going to create, how many people I'm going to have to apologize to the next day. So it's a really long journey. And I took it to an extreme that a lot of people don't, for sure. I had quite a bit of legal trouble. I didn't have any consequences or trouble until the very end of my drinking. And I point that out because a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm very high functioning. And I was like, yeah, well, so was I. That didn't make me less of an alcoholic. I went to work every day too. I lived in a beautiful place. I had the $60,000 car in the garage and lived in the right zip code, and I looked fantastic. I was high functioning too. But that doesn't make me less of an alcoholic. So at the very end of my drinking career, I got a DUI. And once I was in the legal system, it became much more challenging because the main thing they want you to do is not drink. And that was like the one thing I couldn't do, was stop drinking. So I started accumulating all of these consequences. And I violated my probation several times. I did have to do some days in jail. And then ultimately, I crashed my car at 70 miles an hour on the freeway, and I hit another car. And there was a moment in there that I really thought that I had killed the person I hit. And that was my true rock bottom moment, because I understood throughout my drinking life, I always understood I could hurt myself, and I hurt myself in various ways, drunk bumps, I call them. You always end up with bruises, or you fall down, or whatever the thing is. But it never, ever crossed my mind that I could hurt somebody else. So once I was in that position, that was a game changer for me. The guy I hit was absolutely fine. I did not hurt him. I was the only one injured, actually. So thank God that outcome was good. But on top of all the legal trouble I was already in, it compounded that significantly. And I was facing a substantial piece of jail time. And I knew that I just had to turn my life around. It just wasn't optional anymore.
And so fast forward a number of years. I mean, it's not like you suddenly wake up one day and say, "Okay, I'm a life coach. I'm starting this and that." That is part of the journey, and the journey is always ongoing, right? I mean, it's not like you're at the end of it now, but you think about how far you have come. Of all of those pieces, the podcast, the speaking, I'm interested in all of it, but I really want to know more about Kansas City recovery, because men's sober living, and there's a website for that, kansascityrecovery.com. It says the addiction support you've been wanting, men's sober living, life skills and recovery coaching, podcast and courses. So that's a little bit more than maybe what I would have expected. By the way, the phone number for anyone that might be interested, 913-289-0893. Tell me about KCR.
So KCR is something that I had always wanted, being in this field of addiction recovery all over the country. Really, you see how much different it is in other places and how robust services are. And there are so many options and resources and so many things. And you get to Kansas City, and this is really, and it's kind of beautiful, but it's a double-edged sword. This is a great little piece of the world that has not been pillaged by the recovery addiction treatment community, but the downside of that is that there aren't a lot of resources. And what I was seeing is, as I was doing interventions with families, right, and we're sending people off to treatment, my Kansas City clients would be calling me going, "Okay, Angela, he's getting out of treatment now. Where's he going to live? We want to do sober living. We haven't been able to find anything that suits our needs or that is clean." And I thought, you know what? There really isn't anything with that higher standard of living and being clean and putting an emphasis on community. And I decided I would just open my own. And I took all the foundational pieces and everything that I know worked for me early in my sobriety, and I created my sober living around that.
It's amazing. And I've got to imagine that the responses that you get have to just fulfill you and some of them, I'm sure, deplete you at times too. I mean, it's not all, it's not all smell the roses kind of stuff, but it certainly has to be the type of work and interactions, good and bad, that keep you going every day, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, it is so much fun. My sober house, I have 2 sober houses. We stay pretty full. We do have very nice homes. They are extremely clean. They can't get away with much because I'm around a lot, and I have great relationships with all the guys. I'm always available to help them and talk them through stuff and make sure that they have resources and whatever they need for whatever stage they're in. And we do put some emphasis on service, which of course has been challenging with coronavirus because a lot of our service work and volunteer opportunities were shut down. So we've had to get a little more creative with that, but we are of service in our community for sure. And that's very important that those guys become a part of that and understand to give back. And we do put a lot of emphasis on fun because I think that gets overlooked when you get sober. Like, it's such serious business and you're trying to rebuild your life. But the truth is, if I don't enjoy my sober life, if I'm not having fun sober, I'm not going to stay sober. Certainly when you're talking about younger people. I mean, if I'm 25, 26, 27 trying to get sober, like, that's tough. It has to be fun. So I do put a lot of emphasis on that and make sure that those guys are really doing things and thinking outside the box and filling their time and not just sitting around being mad about being sober.
Makes sense. And yeah, I mean, there's sort of a stigma here to, okay, because you're getting sober, that means you're never allowed to have fun again. And that's a really interesting way of looking at it, that, wait a minute, the fun doesn't have to stop. It's the drinking that's stopping. Let's go find some other things to do to have fun. I want to hit all my guests. I hit with my baseball themed questions, and I always tell everybody you can love baseball, hate baseball, not be indifferent doesn't make a difference. But these questions all apply to all of our lives. So I'll start with the first one, the home run. What's the biggest home run that you have hit in your career or your life? What's been that big moment?
In my career, I think I would definitely say my podcast. It is something that I'm so proud of and so grateful that I finally got over my fear of doing it and I
Mhm.
finally started it, because that was hard too. But it has been a game changer for sure. It's been so incredible. And to have your voice reach so many people, I really started my podcast just to be informational,
Hmm.
kind of to my clients and sober living, and the parents of the guys in my sober living, like just to answer questions and things like that. And now I'm in the top 1% of podcasts, for downloads every month. And my community has just gotten so much bigger. It's just crazy to have people all over the world listening to you.
Right. And then it becomes somewhat normal. I mean, it's still right mind-boggling to say, oh my gosh, there's somebody listening in this country or there. But I think, it when you see that stuff, it's a reminder of the work that you're doing and the reach that you have. By the way, the podcast, for those wondering, you should all be wondering what the numbers that Angela just gave you there, should say, hey, what am I missing here? It's called Addiction Unlimited, and it's an open and candid conversation about addiction and recovery. So that's a great home run. As a podcaster and longtime broadcaster, I could definitely get on board with that one. We also make a lot of mistakes along the way. So what's the biggest swing and miss that you have taken in your life, and what did you learn from it?
Swing and miss, I would say. That's a tough question. I would say probably my alcoholism. Not that I necessarily consider it a miss, but a huge challenge, right? And also, I mean, I kind of wasted a decade and a half of my life doing nothing, accomplishing nothing. I was a bartender. Which of course led directly to my alcoholism. And all of that was really a lot of fun for a long time. But when I look back on that time that I was so dedicated to my drinking and just being, the party girl, it's like I really missed a big chunk of my life. I sacrificed a big piece of my life without realizing it.
Well, and when you say that, I think, okay, so it's got to be easy to lament that lost decade plus. But at the same time, I wonder, you said it's not really a swing and a miss. Like, if you could go back and just take away your alcoholism, and I'm sure life would be easier, but life would certainly be different right now too. I mean, not that you want the alcoholism to have to happen to set up everything you're doing now, but it's such a part of who you were and who you are now. So do you regret that? Or in some ways, can you look at it and say, this happened for a good reason?
No, I think it's all fantastic. I'll tell you,
Hmm.
the only thing I would probably change is a little, I don't know, a little trauma maybe. I wish emotionally I hadn't gotten so broken. I would
Hmm.
probably change some of that, but
Yeah.
but not no, not the alcoholism part. I'm okay with that. I worked very hard for that.
Hmm. And now look at it, and I think too. I mean, one more follow up before I ask my third baseball theme question. When you're working with all of these people, men, women, certainly the men over at KCR, people all over the country and the world, online community, reaching people for podcasting, there's never going to be a moment, or if there is, it should end pretty quickly, where someone says, "What does she know about this?" Right? I mean, there's got to be incredible credibility of saying, "I've walked in your shoes before."
Yeah, it's huge. And I think addiction is one of the only areas that as addicted people, we do a lot of us have a preference that if someone is going to treat me, so to speak, if somebody is going to be my helping person, I want them to really understand what it's like. Because one of the things with being an addicted person, there's a whole personality that goes with this. It's not just about drinking or using drugs. Like it's a personality type, and it is they call it a brain disease. So our brains do function a little bit differently. And it's, I think, hard to manage that if you don't have it. And it's hard to help people along that path if you don't have it and know it from the inside out.
The last baseball themed question is about small ball. It's what I wrote my book on, small ball, big results, the little things that add up to the big home runs. And this applies on the baseball field. It applies certainly something I talk about all the time in my speaking on the podcast. We all have those little things that we do every day that maybe they may not be viewed as big or huge, but we know that doing them every single day leads to major success. So what is small ball to you? What are the little things that add up to the home runs?
I love that you ask this question. This is so huge. And I talk about this on my podcast all the time too, about micro decisions, because you don't have a ton of home run moments, right? Your life is not made up of the gigantic events. It's all the little things you do every day to get to the big events. And I would say a huge one for me is probably fitness, really important to me. And I say that because it has been a very challenging journey, right? I am not a workout person that just started working out and loved it, and I've done it ever since. It has been a journey for me that has taken a lot of practice and a lot of dedication. And, I really exercise more for my mental health than anything else. It's extremely important to me. It's a lot of research that shows that exercise is more successful than antidepressant and anti-anxiety medication. And I have anxiety that at times can be debilitating. So I will always take care of my mental health with exercise and whatever little ritual things I do. Sometimes it's meditation, sometimes it's meetings, but it all kind of revolves around caring for my mental health.
I love that answer. As someone that just has never been able to work out as much as I should, I find myself so often getting caught up in, I need to lose this amount of weight. And sure I do, but there's still that, even when it's for me in the midst of baseball, that 20 minutes of getting to the gym and just feeling better. There's so much to that. But we all get so caught up in the numbers and all those things. It's just, taking care of ourselves and putting ourselves in that right frame of mind. Okay, I've got 4 final questions as we round the bases. The first one will be about leadership. And so much of this podcast is about leadership, and what you're doing involves leadership every day, because you have to, and to me, when people ask me this, and I know everybody has different views, but for me, with culture and leadership, it all begins with trust. Everything begins with trust. And even to the point where, with my baseball interviews right now, I'm not doing them face-to-face still. It's all by Zoom. And I feel like I'm getting better interviews from the players that I've built trust with over the years. The new guys that I really haven't met face-to-face, that becomes a greater challenge for you. And back to it can't be, Angela, as simple as, hey, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm a former alcoholic. I mean, okay, fine. But you have to build that trust. How do you lead? How do you build trust? How do you, in such a often heavy moments, establish that with others?
I think it's really speaking from experience, and connecting on an emotional level and not just on a, addict to addict. Who cares? That's important, but it's like people have to know that you understand what they're feeling and where they're coming from. And they have to know that you have solutions and answers in that, right? That you know how to do it and you know how to guide them out of it. So speaking from experience and knowing the feelings and the phases and all of those things from the inside out is huge.
Second question, as we round the bases, I want to get a feel for this. I mean, you walk into, and certainly before the pandemic, to some pretty, I would imagine, hairy situations, some really desperate. I mean, in my mind, if you're talking intervention, that's sort of like the last crack at it, potentially. And if you're getting to a point of intervention, it's to that point where things are probably dire. Just take me through, not a specific, not a person or anything like that, but what does that look like when you walk in, and what are your emotions like? I mean, I'll give you this example, and it's not a good comparison, but what I do being on TV is not something that most people get a chance to do. And so oftentimes they'll say, well, how do you get nervous? No, this is just what I do. and I believe it's what I was born to do, and I'm very comfortable doing it. And people might say, well, don't you get nervous in front of the cameras? No, I don't think like that. So I imagine when you walk into a situation, and I don't know, like, this is what you were born to do. This is what you're good at doing. What are the emotions like? And just take me through what that process is like.
I think for me, obviously for me, it's a much different situation than it is for the family involved, but for me, it's not my loved one, right? My direct opponent when I'm going in that room is addiction. And the good news on my end is addiction is very predictable. So where the family, of course, has all this emotion attached to it and they're exhausted and they've been in this battle for years, usually, and they have no idea what to do. There's no manual to tell you how to deal with this stuff. For me, I'm not, I know addiction and I speak addict fluently. So it is a little nerve wracking when you're first going in because there's always some unknown, right? There's always a sense of unpredictability. You don't know exactly what you're walking into or what mood the person is going to be in or how receptive they're going to be or if they're going to be angry. All of those things are possible. But I would say typically in the first few minutes, we've already diffused that. Intervention is extremely strategic. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. There's a lot of coaching with the family. So the family knows exactly what their role is and isn't. They don't have to do a lot. I really will lead the ship as much as possible and take that pressure off them because they are not equipped to deal with it. But regardless of what you see on television, more often than not, intervention is a very mellow, laid back. I mean, certainly people can get angry. It doesn't normally last long if you handle it well. And yeah, I always say, we're just having a conversation. It's not, nobody's forcing anybody to do anything. I'm not throwing a net over you and dragging you out the door. That's just not my style of intervention. I just want to offer you some solutions and give you the opportunity to jump on your own team, really. But we just plan carefully. And I am always in a good couple of hours of meditation before I walk into an intervention because it is imperative that I am calm and that I am open and that I can recognize what's happening in that person in the process and I can meet them in that spot. And I just want everybody to feel safe and protected and loved. That's the most important thing to me. And the energy of the room is the most important part of that. And we do a lot of planning to make it that way.
I'm fascinated about the meditation leading in. I mean, almost that you've got to come in there at your best with all of your energy mentally and have that full tank of gas, but that clear head because you're going to be the only one in the room that's in that state, right? I mean, if you go to the state of everybody else and the emotions, and I'm assuming that for everyone, almost everyone involved, they're at their wits' end and they don't know what to do and they can't think clearly. You are the clarity, right?
For sure. Yeah. Everybody in that room is really tired. Again, they've usually been in this process and losing the battle for years. They just need somebody that can give guidance, that knows what's going on, to offer some solutions and possibilities.
All right. Third question as we round the bases. I know, again, without knowing you very well, that you must take so much, not just pride, but receive so much when you see others make it, that you can help them make it. That has to be so much of your life and your purpose. Oftentimes people wake up and say, what am I doing? I don't love what I do. I'm just paying the bills. And yet you see lives being saved and lives being changed. Is there and I want to be sensitive about names and not intruding or pushing too hard, but is there a story that just has always stuck with you, or do the stories stick with you that was almost life-changing for you? I mean, you talked about that revelation of potentially injuring someone else and thank God nothing happened. That was certainly a life-changing moment for you. Have you had, one or many of those experiences that stand out that just said, this is why I do what I do?
Yeah, for sure. I had a guy that came through my sober living a few years ago. Really, really tough case. Great guy, really vicious drug addiction. And I just felt like more than anything, he just needed somebody to believe in him when there was no reason to believe in him. It was a consistent relapse and he had a lot of legal trouble and it was hard. His addiction was really, really hard. And I just was so committed to believing in him because I knew he had that inner strength. Like he has an inner strength that you don't see very often. And I just wanted him to start to see that, and I worked with his family and, eventually at some point I got him into detox, walked him in there. And then I ended up taking him to long-term treatment in Austin and he is still there. He is phenomenal. He just texted me a few months ago and said, I'm here because of you. He said, a lot of people were on my team, but you saved my life. And those are the things, right? To see him now, 2.5 years later, living a life and thriving and really growing up and becoming the person, right? Because that was the thing for me. I didn't know I was capable. I didn't believe in myself at all. And when I started to see myself transitioning, it was so fascinating and it was so exciting. It's like you just want to show other people they can do it too.
So inspiring. It really is. The last question then along those lines, because the question here is going to be what's next for you, but I love on your website, there's a quote from Newsweek that says part consultant, part motivational speaker, part therapist, and part rent-a-friend. Coaches work with managers, entrepreneurs, and just plain folks, helping them define and achieve their goals, career, personal, or most often both. So Angela, you're doing everything. But I know the way people like you are wired. It's not that I don't know that it's never enough. It's just you're wired in a way that you want to get out there and make a difference. And you don't always know what that is either, right? I mean, you couldn't have known the podcast would take off the way it did, and on and on and on. But and by the way, if this is an addiction, this is a great addiction, helping other people. So what is next for you?
So I think now that we are coming out of the coronavirus woods, the next thing is I'm going to start doing some in-person events, like retreat style coaching events. We're going to start doing some of that probably next year, hoping that my speaking part of my career gets back on track and people start doing things in person again. I've enjoyed doing speaking things, on Zoom or whatever, but it is definitely not the same. So I'm excited to get back out there and speak. I've done a lot of speaking, not just with addiction, but I do a lot of entrepreneurial stuff as well. And I've been involved in WordCamp Kansas City several years, have done speaking engagements with them because I'm a self-taught. I built all my own websites, all that stuff. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to getting back out there and being able to meet a lot of my community that is everywhere, to meet them in person and to get back out to wandering the globe.
Well, I know you will do it and you will do it well. And whether that means your time bringing you back to Kansas City, which is where you've been throughout this pandemic, whether it's LA or wherever it is, I could let everybody know that to find out about all of these elements of Angela's life, you can go to angelapugh.com. Angela spelled the way Angela would be spelled for, I think, anybody, but in case you don't know, Angela, and the last name is Pugh. So angelapugh.com. You'll find all about the podcast and the recovery services and the intervention and the speaking and everything else that is going on in her world, really making such an impact in so many people's lives, men, women, kids, and whatnot, and taking those experiences that she had and making the world a better place. Angela, thank you so much for spending the time. Continued success, and I appreciate you spending the time in the visit today.
Thanks, Joel. It was great talking to you. Thanks for having me on.